Hello there, this is Yana Smakula. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm sharing 4 slimline cards that feature absolutely no stamping, just good old die cutting and some hot foiling to make the sentiments. I'm working with a new collection from Spellbinders called Slimline. This is a stunning lineup of products designed specifically with slimline cards in mind, and I love these. They feature classic, timeless designs that can be used over and over again for various occasion cards. These dies in these products are also sized ideally to help you make the perfect slimline card. I also have several techniques to share in this video. They're not new, but they are tried and true techniques when it comes to die cutting. First up is the Inlay die cutting technique, and I'm using the Blossoming Slimline die for this. I've already cut this die from white cardstock and you can see how beautiful it looks. This design has a pre-built sentiment panel for you in the center, so you don't need to think about where to fit the message on your card. I have also die cut a backer panel for my card from light blue cardstock, and all of these slimline dies come with a backer die to die cut a background panel, and they are all slightly different in shape. And what's great, you can mix and match them for even more use. Here I have my white die cut, and before I can do any inlaying, I need to clean it up from all the negative die cut pieces. Now the Spellbinders Tool-in-One is super helpful when it comes to getting rid of the negative die cuts. You can use the brush end of the tool to brush the negatives away, or if any pesky little pieces appear to be stuck, you can use the pokey end of the tool to poke them out. Next, I need to adhere this panel onto the backer panel, and for this, I'm using glue. This is Barely Arts glue. I recently discovered it and I love it. It has a very fine nozzle. It hasn't clogged on me once, and I have been using it for several months now. It is quite runny, so it comes out of the bottle very easily. I don't have to squeeze the bottle hard to get the glue out, which is good because my hand doesn't get tired. I'm going to adhere the Blossoming Slimline white die cut onto the light blue panel. The light blue panel will make the background, and it will also make a surface for me to inlay the pieces into. Here's a close-up. I already love the look of this. It's very simple, very classy, very beautiful. Now, the easiest way to inlay something into a panel this big is the following. Go ahead and die cut the same panel from a different color cardstock. I used light green, and I will use this color to inlay the leaves. So we have the flowers, the leaves, and the berries in this background, and we also have a background. Now keep your die cut panel in the die if possible. Mine stayed in place pretty firmly, and this is ideal for inlay die cutting technique for this die cutting technique. If yours doesn't want to stay in place, you can hold it down using press and seal or some temporarily low-tech adhesive tape. Now, position the die over your main die cut and align it the best you can. And when you move your die over the die cut, you can sort of feel it lock in place. Then use a pokey tool of your tool-in-one and poke the pieces you need to inlay into your main design. Like I said, in this case, I am inlaying the leaves. Now my placement isn't always 100% perfect, but I'm pretty close and I can easily pop the negative pieces into the corresponding openings. Now this is the easiest way to inlay something, especially when you have a design with a million oddly shaped pieces like this one. I did try doing this the hard way at first. You can see I have the yellow and the purple panels on my desk along with a pile of negative pieces. Now that is like putting a very complicated puzzle together. Once you've popped the negatives out of the die, a die like this, it is going to take you a very long time to pop the pieces back in. More importantly, it's going to find you a very long time to find where each piece goes. So best to keep everything in the die and just poke whatever pieces you need onto your main die cut. So I've poked all of the leaf pieces out, and next I'm going to use one of my pickup tools. I actually have 3 of those in my stash. I have 2 crystal katana tools, and I've been using them for years, and then a jewel picker tool. This is a relatively new tool in my craft room. And I do use all 3 of those, whichever one I can find, because my desk is a constant mess, and whichever tool I can find, that's the one I will grab and use. You will need to use some sort of a pickup tool to be able to pick up the pieces and move them, to be able to add glue to stick them down. Trust me, it is nearly impossible to handle small pieces such as these just with fingers unless you have very tiny fingers, so best to use a specialty tool. It will make this process 1,000 times easier and quite enjoyable too. Now, I did think about adding double-sided adhesive to the entire blue panel, to the front of that blue panel, before sticking the white panel on top, and usually this is the route I would take. But in this case, I wanted some of that blue background to show. I didn't want to inlay the entire piece, so using a solid layer of double-sided adhesive wasn't really going to work here. Not unless you add clear glitter over the remainder of the open areas with the adhesive to neutralize that adhesive. Now, thinking about this now, I wish I would have thought of it when I was making this card. It would have looked really pretty, especially with some of that clear glitter added to the background, and it would have made the process a little bit easier and maybe a little bit faster too. I'll know better next time. Maybe you can try this idea out and tell me if that worked well for you. I finished inlaying the leaves, and next I die-cut the same panel from yellow cardstock to inlay some of the flowers in the color yellow. Well, I should say all of the flowers in yellow. I popped the negatives out using my tool-in-one. I tried to pop them all at once, and that worked pretty well. I did have a few stubborn pieces, but I was able to place them into the corresponding openings without any problems. Next, I realigned my die and popped the negatives for the next flower, and so on. Again, I used the pickup tool and that Burley Arts glue to stick all of the negative pieces in place and to color my flowers. Now, this is something I also like to call coloring with paper, as you are using colored cardstock, colored paper to add color to your die cuts. I have a video showing another take on this technique on my YouTube channel, and I'll link that in the cards here for you in case you'd like to check it out for more ideas. The colors of cardstock I'm using today are beeswax. It is this pretty yellow color. Peridot. This is the light green that I used for the leaves. Glacier. This is very pretty light blue used for the background. And Purple Mist, which is the light purple. All of these are new cardstock colors from Spellbinders. These colors are very pretty. The cardstock itself is high quality and very thick. It's simply perfect for die cutting and also for hot foiling. I inlaid all of the flowers using yellow, and then to finish this background, I used light purple for the berries. I really adore this combination, yellow, purple, and green. That speaks spring to me, and if you've been following me for more than a year, you might have noticed that when spring comes, I usually come back to this color combination. I hardly ever go to it during the other seasons, but I always use it when it is spring. Here's a look at this panel once finished. I quite like the way it turned out. Now, the Slimline collection features not only slimline dies, but also a set of very pretty florals. These are called mini blooms and sprigs, and they are ideal to create little floral embellishments for your cards. In fact, I use these to dress up all 4 of the cards I'm sharing in this video. I die-cut these from the same colors of cardstock. I also added a layer cut from the lilac blossom color, which is the darker purple, and I assembled the flowers using glue. There are many ways how one can put these flowers together. I went with the simplest, as that looked the most pretty to me. I also die-cut the leaves, and I love the fact that these have the pretty details added to them right away. And then the flowers too. Many of the florals have pretty veins added when the cut is made. That really sets these flowers apart and the leaves apart. I used glue and also foam adhesive squares to add these onto the background. I clustered several around the blank panel in the center. Now, I had planned to add a foiled sentiment. I knew the sentiment wouldn't be as long as that panel, so I needed to cover a part of it up, and I did that using these blooms. Now, you do have special sentiments in the Slimline collection. You have a set with the glimmer plates, and I will use one of those for one of the cards today. So you have the longer sentiments for you. And there's also a stamp set with the longer sentiments that will fit perfectly inside these little panels that are there. They're pre-designed for you to house the sentiment. But that doesn't mean that you cannot use a different sentiment, like I'm using here, a different sentiment from your stash. Now I find that these florals look best when there is a jewel added on top. So I used my Pretty Pink Posh jewels to dress these up. And once you add a jewel, it changes the look of that flower completely and it really finishes it off nicely. Now, it doesn't have to be a jewel. It can be some other embellishment. It could be an enamel dot or something. I happen to love these jewels from Pretty Pink Posh, so I use those for all of the cards I'm sharing today. I added a foiled sentiment to this card, and this reads, "You are a wonderful friend," and the sentiment comes from my Yana's Special Sentiments set. I foiled it in matte gold foil to avoid having that harsh shine that the regular gold foil offers, and then I foam mounted the sentiment onto the card. This particular sentiment set comes with coordinating dies, so you can easily cut your sentiment out. The next card uses a Slimline embossing folder. Yes, Spellbinders came out with a Slimline size embossing folder for all of our Slimline cards. This particular embossing folder has a very pretty floral design, and I mostly like to use it in two ways, which I'll show you in a minute. So here's a look at the folder. I didn't trim my paper to size, I just placed a larger piece of cardstock inside. I'll emboss it, and then once it is embossed, I will trim it down. All Slimline products from Spellbinders fit in the 6-inch platinum die cutting machine because the length of the plates in this machine is nearly 9 inches, and the Slimline dies and the folder is less than 8.5 inches, so you don't need to get the big die cutting machine for these. You can use your regular machine. The sandwich for this embossing folder in the platinum machine is a base platform, the folder with the paper inside, and then one clear cutting plate on top. That's all you need, no extra plates, no extra shims. And here's a look at the embossed background. Very pretty floral background. As I mentioned, there are two ways I like to use these types of embossing backgrounds. First, I like to emboss it in white and then ink blend various colors of ink to add color. Here I have a few Distress Oxide inks and a mini round ink blending tool from Ranger with a Spellbinders foam. This is how I like to ink blend. I'm going to ink blend these colors onto the background to liven it up a little bit and add color. There is a multitude of options when it comes to ink blending. You can pick different colors. You can go in an ombre, in a rainbow, or in any other order. Usually I like to blend a mix of yellow, pink, and light blue. The combination of yellow and blue creates hints of green. Then the combination of pink and blue creates touches of purple. And then the combination of pink and yellow makes orange. So you blend these three colors, but you actually end up having more colors on your background. I didn't use this particular background for any of my cards today, but I still wanted to include this footage in my video to show you, to give you another idea as to how you can use these products. Another way I like to use my embossing folder is by dry embossing colored cardstock. Here I emboss the Spellbinders light blue glacier cardstock and lightly ink blended white ink over it. The cardstock color is very pale, and in this case, adding white ink isn't really visible on camera. It does add a touch of difference to the background. The background remains slightly darker, and the raised embossed areas appear lighter because of the white ink that is added on top. You can also go direct to paper, like so, and apply the ink straight from the ink pad to cover a larger area faster. So this is another favorite way of mine to use an embossing folder. Once I'm done ink blending, I like to set the background aside to dry. I used pigment ink, and it does require some time to completely dry on the paper. So a couple of minutes, you need to set the paper aside. I will be foam mounting a sentiment panel and then some florals on top of this background, and for the adhesive to stick, the paper needs to be dry. While the paper was drying, I did some prep work off camera. I die cut a skinny panel to house the sentiment. I used the die for the skinny panel from the Blossoming Slimline set, and I'm going to foam mount that panel onto the card. With this embossing folder, there is no predefined area for a sentiment, so you have the freedom to place it wherever you want. I placed mine a little closer towards the bottom of the panel and also foam mounted a foiled sentiment on top. This one reads, "Thank you," and it comes from my Yana's Special Sentiments Glimmer set, and it was also foiled in matte gold foil to avoid having that harsh shine that the regular gold foil offers. I decorated additional florals and leaves from the mini blossoms in sprigs set. I dressed them up with jewels and look how pretty they turned out. They look almost as pre-made embellishments. So gorgeous. And I love that this set offers various sizes and shapes of flowers too. I use these images to fill in the space around the sentiment and then adhere those in place using a combination of foam adhesive and glue. The images that were adhered onto the white label were adhered using glue, and those that were adhered directly onto the background were adhered using foam adhesive. I foam mounted this background panel onto a slimline card base, so I added another layer of dimension, and that finished this card. This one is probably the simplest and the easiest of all the projects I have today. For my next card, I used the flowering slimline die. I cut the main panel from white cardstock and the background panel from light blue glacier from Spellbinders. I love the shape of this with the inverted corners. It's very simple, but very different from your usual rectangle. Now, this die features some leaves and some florals. My plan was to add die-cut flowers over the background flowers to help them pop up, like so. And I was able to do that using the same mini blossoms in sprigs set. I opted for a light blue and yellow color combination. To create a sentiment for this card, I foiled one that reads, "Happy birthday from all of us." This sentiment is also a part of the Slimline collection, and it comes from the Essential Glimmer Sentiments set. That's that set that I mentioned earlier with the longer sentiments that are actually ideal for the Slimline type cards. I once again used my matte gold foil. I'm nearly out of this foil. I just have the tiniest piece left and I need to reorder this right away. It is my current favorite foil color. I cut the sentiment panel out using a rectangle die. Now, the flowering slimline set comes with a rectangle die, but I used the die from the blossoming slimline set to have those inverted corners on my sentiment panel. I love that I can interchange parts of these die sets from this collection, and they all work really well together. I foam mounted the sentiment panel onto my card, onto the background. I have already adhered the white die-cut piece onto a light blue background panel, and I added my sentiment panel on top. Next, I played around with the florals to dress up this card. I die-cut and slightly shaped the flowers using my fingers and assembled the florals using glue just like I did for the previous two projects. Now here's a trick I like to use when assembling these tiny florals. I like to do that on top of a foam square, especially if I know I'll be popping that particular floral up. I removed the backer from my foam square. I add a leaf or two leaves to that foam square that is still sitting on the backer sheet. Then I add a dot of glue and pop a flower on top. I leave that for a minute or two to let the glue dry, and then I just use that floral cluster as is to adhere directly onto the card. I'm sorry I went nearly off camera here, but I hope this gives you an idea of how I assemble these. This way makes it a lot easier to attach the leaves as they are so very tiny, especially those leaves that are the smallest. And using foam squares as a base for these really tiny images works wonderful when you need to assemble the tiny pieces. I decided to use a panel of dark blue cardstock for my background for this card, so I covered the front of my Slimline card base, which was made from white cardstock, with dark blue. The dark blue is also from Spellbinders, and it is called Cosmic Sky. I love the way that this card turned out, and I think that dark blue background really helps the card pop. For my final card for today, I used the Moroccan Kaleidoscope Slimline die. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but that die is so stunning. I opted to go with purple, gold, and yellow for this design, but I know teal would look just as stunning as this is the color you'd usually see in Morocco. I did die cut the main panel from purple mist cardstock from Spellbinders and a backer panel from white. I used glue to adhere the panel onto the background. I didn't add any dimension at this point. Next, I cut the Kaleidoscope pieces from the same purple mist cardstock, then also a darker purple, lilac blossom, and then another layer from gold. The idea is to stack these pieces like so to create a decorative tile for your card. These are very pretty and they look fantastic. In fact, you can use just the tiles by themselves to create any sort of background for any size card you want. These do take quite a lot of time to cut because you have 3 layers to each, but they are absolutely worth it. I used glue to adhere the 3 layers together, and then I set an acrylic block on top to apply pressure while the glue was drying. Next, I used foam adhesive squares to foam mount these onto the card, and I just love this look. It is very classy. Now, you might have noticed that I have some gold pieces on my desk. These look like negatives. I die cut a small portion of this background from gold mirror cardstock to have a few of those negative pieces to inlay into the background. So here's another twist on the inlay die cutting technique for you. These negative pieces add so much interest and so much detail. And instead of inlaying the entire background, I just inlaid a section, a small portion of it. I used glue to adhere the pieces inside the open spaces on my background. To create a sentiment for this card, I foiled one that reads "Sending birthday wishes" and I adhered it onto the card using glue. Now, this sentiment doesn't come from this collection. It actually comes from a totally different set. This is from the Spellbinders Mini Everyday Sentiment set. And actually, I have all of the supplies I'm using today listed in the video description below. So you can use whatever sentiments you have in your stash with these Slimline dies to create any occasion cards you want. I also created several yellow flowers to dress up this card, and I adhered them going somewhat diagonally around that sentiment. Finally, I foam mounted this panel onto a Slimline card base, and the size of all of these cards, the size of the Slimline card base is 3.5 by 8.5 inches. Here's a look at all of the Slimline cards I have for you today, created with the Spellbinders Slimline collection. These all fit inside the standard Slimline envelope, even with a little bit of room to spare. I combined each of these cards with a Slimline envelope from Simon Says stamp, and I tried to match the color of the envelope to the color of the cards, and I just love the way this turned out. I had the best time making these cards, and I hope I've inspired you to do some crafting and die cutting yourself. Thanks for joining me today. Love you guys, and I'll see you next time.